Hey guys, so this is the chapter 4, the Prehistoric Aegean lecture video series here. So we're going to differentiate the formal characteristics of Cycladic, Minoan, and Mycenaean art from those of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. And then we're going to list the principal sites and characteristics of Cycladic, Minoan, and Mycenaean art. We're going to compare and contrast the palatial complexes of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, describe the subjects and techniques of Minoan fresco painting, list the aspect of prehistoric Aegean art and architecture and how they preview those of ancient Greece, discuss the evidence of intercultural contact between the three Aegean cultures, and then also the three Aegean cultures and ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. We're going to identify and describe the materials used to create prehistoric Aegean art, and then we're going to list the differences between Minoan and Mycenaean building materials and techniques. So you guys have all heard of it. I'm sure you have. If you haven't, you've at least seen adaptations of Homer's epic poems, either the Iliad or the Odyssey. If you've seen Troy with Brad Pitt, it's actually an adaptation of Homer's Iliad. And Brad Pitt actually plays the legendary warrior Achilles in this movie, and who's a legendary Greek figure, really. He's a hero. And we're going to talk about these epics because they're some of the main sources of information that we have of this specific time period of the prehistoric Aegean. And so the Iliad and the Odyssey are written in the 8th century by the Greek author Homer. And one thing to note is Homer wasn't even alive during the prehistoric Aegean. He was several hundred years after, I believe. I'm not quite sure exactly how long after the prehistoric Aegean he lived, but he wasn't alive during the prehistoric Aegean. But he did write these stories about them, and they were probably stories that were orally handed down for hundreds of years before Homer even got a hold of them to write them down in these epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the Iliad is actually set during the Trojan War, and that's what Troy is based off of. The movie Troy is based off the Iliad. And it's the first of the two books. And the thing that kicked off the Trojan War, it's really about the Trojan War, the Iliad is, and it started with the abduction of the Queen Helen of Sparta. And obviously Sparta's one of the many Greek kingdoms at the time. And it's thought that Helen either went willingly with the Trojan prince, whose name was Paris, or she went by force, but we don't really know. Either way, Helen's husband, Menelaus, who was the king of Sparta, was not happy about his missing queen. And so he enlists his brother king Agamemnon of Mycenae to join him on an expedition to retrieve his queen from the city of Troy. And so these brother kings bring Achilles, they bring Odysseus with them, and they also bring a fleet of more than 1,000 ships to go get Helen. And really that's kind of the legend of the start of the Trojan War, and really Homer's Iliad talks about that specifically. So in the Iliad, the Greeks travel across the sea, they lay siege to the city of Troy, where Helen is and where Paris is, and they demand Helen's return. And the Greeks do end up winning, and they end up conquering the Trojans, and Helen is reunited with her king Menelaus. So that's kind of the story of the Iliad in a nutshell, and this is the story where the Trojan horse came from. And basically the story of the Trojan horse is just that, King Menelaus and Odysseus and all of his Greek troops, they made this wooden horse. They put a select group of soldiers inside of it. They left it outside the gates of Troy. The Greeks then pretended to sail away and go home. And so the Trojans actually bring the wooden horse inside of the city, where under the cover of night, the select group of Greek soldiers that are inside of this Trojan horse come out and actually open the gate and let the rest of the Greek army into the city of Troy. And that's how the war between the Greeks and the Trojans was won, was with this trick, basically, of the wooden Trojan horse. So the Odyssey is considered to be the sequel to the Iliad, and the Odyssey focuses more on the 10-year return home of the Greek warrior Odysseus, who fought with who was actually, okay, so Odysseus was the king of Ithaca, but he did fight in the Trojan War. He helped retrieve Helen, and then after that, basically the story of the Odyssey chronicles Odysseus's journey home. So, I mean, he goes from Troy after the war to, over here in Tunisia, up here, and then Calypso, and then finally makes it home to Ithaca. And that's, I believe, around a 10-year journey. And so along the way, he sees a lot of fantastical creatures. He encounters a lot of Greek gods and a lot of creatures in Greek folklore that, existed during this time, during the prehistoric Aegean. There was a lot of folklore and a lot of creatures that were supposedly alive, and a lot of Greek gods that ended up coming and being amongst the regular people. So Odysseus, ends up encountering a lot of that. And the things about these poems is we don't consider them to be totally accurate to history. They're legendary. So legends include a mixture of things that could have happened, but also include events, kind of elements of fantasy interwoven around the historical facts or events. So it's not completely accurate. And legends are often, they're transformed over time in order to keep them fresh or relevant in their culture. And the Iliad and the Odyssey fall into this classification of legend because, I mean, for the most part, a lot of these were oral stories, like orally told by a storyteller for many years. And then Homer finally kind of got to writing them down, I believe. That's kind of how that worked. So this is the area of the world we're talking about during this chapter. We're going to really kind of do a little deeper dive into it. But there's basically three areas: the Cyclades, which is in pink, the island of Crete here in brown, and the Peloponnesus, which is also called the mainland of Greece. So these are kind of the main areas that we're talking about. This is Asia Minor over here. That's the city of Troy. But we're mostly talking about these three areas when we talk about the prehistoric Aegean. So we're going to take a look at a piece that is a great example of the type of art that we're going to be covering in this chapter. So this is a sarcophagus from Agean Triada off of Crete in Greece, 1450 to 1400 BCE, and it's painted limestone, and it's 4 feet 6 inches long. And these paintings help piece together the funerary rites of Minoan society, and they provide a rare glimpse into the Minoan religion. So, one of the longer sides of their sarcophagus, we can see there are 4 women. So there's 3 here and then 1 here. And a male flute player. So here he is playing his flute. And then there's an ox tied up on this table here. So this is kind of this table. And one woman is actually making an offering here on this altar. And then on the other side of the sarcophagus, it's divided actually up into kind of 2 scenes. On the left, the woman is pouring liquid from a vessel into a larger vessel here in between 2 double-headed axes, which the double-headed axe in this culture symbolized sacrifice, and she's probably pouring in blood from some sort of sacrifice into this vessel here. And then there's other women behind her carrying jars and a man as well. And you can see the women are pictured as having light skin and the men have dark skin. And this is a common convention found in Minoan art specifically. And so it's just one way of telling the difference between men and women rather quickly. It's just a common convention used, and it's how they told, the sexes apart. You can also tell by their clothing, but it's definitely way more apparent if they're, if they're dark or light skinned. Basically, it does help a lot to distinguish the sexes. And then on the right register over here, 3 men are carrying gifts. So we have sacrifices of bulls, and this man actually carries a miniature boat, a model of a boat, and they're offering it to the dead man, which is actually the owner of this tomb. Or the sarcophagus, I guess I should say. So this is him represented as maybe in the afterlife, but these people are bringing him gifts. So the Minoans did leave behind a written language, but it has yet to be deciphered. So scholars and historians really use pieces like this to help reconstruct life on Crete during this time. So Troy and Mycenae. In the late 1800s, archaeologists uncovered some of the very cities that Homer named in his epic poems. In 1870, the ancient city of Troy on the coast of Turkey was discovered. And then work began on Mycenae in the Greek mainland. And this is where King Agamemnon was believed to have ruled. You know, this is the story of the Iliad, remember, the Trojan War over Helen. And so they found this in this site in the 1800s, and they believed that he ruled in Mycenae, and a massive fortress was found here in Mycenae. And it's a palace fortress. It has some impressive gateways, and then it has this circle of royal graves and tombs. So they found gold, drinking cups, inlaid bronze weapons, and it really did reveal an advanced civilization in the area of Mycenae, far older than that of classical Greece, which comes after the prehistoric Agean period. And it was soon discovered that Mycenae was obviously, it's not the only impressive civilization going on during the prehistoric Aegean. Minoan Crete is also, this is where the Minoans resided. This is where the Mycenaeans were located, but the Minoans were on Crete, and this is where King Minos was known to have ruled, and he was the king of Knossos, which is this area here. And the archaeologists did actually find a palace resembling a maze, which was mentioned in, I believe, either the Iliad or the Odyssey. So there's some truth to that there was a kind of maze-like palace, because they found one in Knossos, which they think it's King Minos's castle, probably. And the archaeologists that discovered this, named this place the Minoans after their mythological king, the King Minos, basically. And there's other areas of Crete that have Minoan influence and relics and, evidence of Minoan civilization. They found some evidence in Phaistos and Hagia Triada and Guernica. So the Minoans were all throughout Crete. So recent discoveries have been made on Crete and the various islands in the Aegean Sea as well. And the finds that they see in these areas just attest to the wealth and sophistication of the people and the cultures that were thriving during this time. So they also know of texts in Linear A and Linear B that document the history of the civilization of the prehistoric Aegean, and they're just now being deciphered. And scientists have actually discovered that Linear B is actually a very early form of Greek, and they've really begun to reconstruct the Mycenaean civilization, which is in this area. So that's pretty interesting. We don't just have to rely on Homer's account. We can actually use Linear B to help us out with that. And it's also known that humans occupied Greece as far back as the Paleolithic period into the Neolithic period. And the ancient Aegean didn't really start, or the heyday of the ancient Aegean didn't really start until the emergence of the river valley civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. So Mesopotamia kind of came first, then Egypt, then the prehistoric Aegean. And that's kind of why we're going in the order that we are with our book. But I think I will pause the video here and we will start back up in the next video.